Before we move to Fernandina Beach, many of you will be aware Margaret and I spent 5 very happy years with Eva and Jackson there in Titusville, down in Central Florida, right on the Space Coast. During that time, I developed a friendship with another parent of one of Jackson's classmates. Eva refers to the friendship that developed as my bromance with my friend Jeremy. Jeremy and I would go for a walk several mornings in the week, and we would put the world to right as we did so. And since moving here a couple of years ago, I've certainly missed Jeremy a great deal, missed those walks, missed our opportunities to have conversation together on a regular basis. But we have stayed in touch by text message and by the occasional phone call and visit whenever we can make it happen. One of the things that we have been saying a lot in the last number of months during this strange season in our lifetimes is this: these times, man. We will text that to each other and imagine the other shaking their head as they've texted it, or we will say it to each other on the telephone. These times, man. As we work our way through and process through the things that are going on in our world, those are the words that we express, maybe a little bit exasperated at the end of our conversation. These times, man. You know, it was a set of times that Mark, the gospel writer, was writing of, and those words that Chris has read for us here this morning already. Mark is writing his words about some times that were happening in the first third of the very first century AD, or CE, as we now refer to it as the Common Era. He was writing about events that were taking place in the first third of the very first century. But he was not writing about those events in the first third of the first century. He was actually probably writing them from somewhere in the middle of the final third of the first century. Why does that make a difference? Well, he was probably writing these words at a time when the very thing that he was writing and foretelling in Mark chapter 13, that is the fall of the Jerusalem temple, that had probably already taken place by the time that Mark was writing. From the final third of the first century, writing about things that had taken place in the first third. But it was a crisis that was happening in that world, in the community that Mark was writing his gospel for. And so what this piece of writing is more than likely a piece of crisis literature. A piece of literature that has been written to help those who are reading it at a very specific time deal with the world that is going on around them. And we should make no mistake, and we should not underestimate the impact that the fall of the Jerusalem temple would have had on that community of people that Mark was writing to, because it was a catastrophic event in their lifetimes that placed upon them an immense pressure of change in the ways that they were living their lives at the time. You see, the temple in Jerusalem was not only the center of religious life, as we would imagine it was, but it was also the center of economic life, the center of political life within a community there. And so the fall of a temple had huge ramifications right the way through the community. Of course, it had very personal impact. Those who were part of that worshiping community had no longer a place where they could gather for that worship. But it was also the center of economic community, I said. And so those traders that would trade in the courtyards of the temple no longer had a place to ply their trade. Businesses were closing, supply chains were being broken. And of course, it was also the center of the little political world in the city of Jerusalem at the time as well. And so that impact was far-reaching. The temple acted as a kind of city hall at the time for the community. And although the rule of the Roman Empire was the reality, the wheelings and dealings of local community life, politically speaking, were taking place in the temple courts there. So the loss for the community, the pain being felt by the community, and the impact on wider community life that was caused by the fall of the temple could not be exaggerated. It caused life, as the first century residents of Jerusalem knew it, to be turned upside down. So in placing this specific speech of Jesus in this place in the gospel, Mark is speaking to his audience directly about what is going on in the world around them at the very time that he's writing. That's the third of the first century, remember? We can be tempted, of course, to lift a text like this out on a Sunday morning like this and hear the words that Chris just read for us and think to ourselves, well, gosh, this language deserves in a book like Revelation more than it does in the Gospel of Mark, because it's speaking of end times, of the return of the Son of Man, of course. And we could think that that's all that it's about, because it is, of course, about that. It's looking forward to the day when the Son of Man will return. But we should not make the mistake of thinking that the hope that's being referred to in this text is a future and far off hope that has not yet been realized. To do so is to forget the meaning of that hope in the present. And we cannot be people who do that, because this hope is a here and now hope. It's being spoken to a depressed and dejected people who have had their lives changed by events that have happened around them that have been completely beyond their control. And more specifically, this is a word that was spoken to a troubled people, and it's more than a generic or cliched platitude given to kind of cheer up a bunch of sad people. No, this is a much more imperative and hope-filled command. Watch, wait, work. That's what Jesus is saying in these words that Mark is recording for us. In the midst of the crisis around you, in the midst of everything that is going on around you, stay alert, watch, because hope is real. Hope is on its way always, even in a time of crisis. God is not absent. God is always at God's work, so watch, stay alert, look out for what God is doing. You see, this is something that Mark emphasized all the way through his gospel. He highlights often that it is the very disciples of Jesus Christ who have a tendency towards a wee bit of ignorance when it comes to recognizing the work of God in the community all around them. So if they were not alert, if they were not awake, if they were not keeping watch, they might miss the very thing that God was doing among them. They had problems with staying alert. You only have to go into the next chapter of the gospel to find Jesus coming from his time of prayer and speaking to his disciples saying, "Wake up, could you not even stay awake for an hour to pray for me?" Watch, wait, and work. This command to wait was a command based on the promise of the returning Holy One. Now, again, this is a very familiar religious theme down through the ages. It's the theme of a perpetual hope based in the truth that the goodness of God has already won the victory, and that God will gather God's people to share in that victory at a time to come. It's this perpetual word of hope that is said to the people in the midst of a crisis, that the crisis that they are in is not the final word. Because God has the final word in all things, of course. And so the people of God must hold on to the hope of God. You see, the coming of God can be relied upon. Just like the blooms of that fig tree can be relied upon at just the right time. That's why Jesus says, take a look and think of the fig tree. When you see those blooms coming through, you know that the summer is coming, that better times are ahead. So as you watch, as you wait, you will see those blooms, that you will know and you will remember that better days are coming, that the victorious Son of Man will return. For Jesus speaking these words in the first third of the first century, for Mark recording them in the third of the first century, for us hearing them in the final third of of 2020, for us hearing them today, we have got to understand that these are things that we can take to the bank. Therefore, we've got to hang on. Even when things seem disastrous, when things seem final, They are not. Watch and wait. Hang on and hang in. Don't let go, because hope is real and it never, ever, ever goes away. Watch, wait, and work. Hang on, hang in, and keep going. That's what's being said in these words of Jesus as they are recorded in the Gospel of Mark. And then finally, Jesus likens it to a boss who is going away for a time, and the work of his company has to continue. It has to be done by the employees. He's saying, keep going. Don't stop doing the work that's been assigned to you. You've maybe heard the saying in your lifetime that while the cat's away, the mice will play. Well, I was on vacation this week and I'm only getting back today, so I don't know what these guys have been up to while I've been gone. Monica assures me that she's not going to tell me. But while the master is gone, while the boss is gone, the workers can actually get up to whatever they want. They can neglect their roles. My goodness, they can even walk away from it all entirely, from their tasks, and face no real consequences while the boss is gone. But that's not an option for the people of God, according to what Jesus is saying here. As the people of God face a crisis around them, that's not an option at all. The people of God are called to maintain a faithful witness of their work, even when nothing makes sense around them. Even when they are facing the kind of crisis that turns everything upside down in their lives, the word today is a word that says, watch and wait and work. And so our question is this: so what? What does it mean for us today on this very first Sunday of Advent in the final third of the year 2020? I mean, we don't really have to make a huge intellectual leap to connect the dots of what I'm trying to say here. If the fall of the Jerusalem temple was the epoch-shifting moment in the lives of that first century world and community, the time when everything changed and in which it felt like everything was maybe lost too, could it be that we also are living in times and we are living through our own similar moment in our own existence? I don't have to explain to you in great detail the extent to which our lives have been changed in these days. My goodness, you're watching me on a screen when really all we want is to be back in the sanctuary together, right? Life has changed. This COVID-19 pandemic has changed things for all of us. And if you are in any way similar to me, which I assume some of you are in some ways, then there might have been moments in these last 8 months when hope and faith were really hard to hold on to. Like any crisis, it's easy to become consumed by what is going on around us in these moments. And in doing so, it's easy to become distracted from the number one purpose and call on our lives as the people of God. That is the call to live faithfully as disciples of Jesus Christ, and in doing so, be agents of transformation in the world. The call of Jesus Christ, our Master, in the midst of any significant crisis, is the call to watch and to wait and to work. And so I have a few questions for you today. You can either take them off and journal them later, or you can respond to them right now in our live community feed as I go through them. The first question is this: where have you been seeing God at work in these days? You just heard a word that reminds us that God is always with us, that God is always at work, even in the midst of a crisis around us. So where have you seen God at work in these most recent days? Second question is this: what are some of the things that help you hold on to hope? If this hope that we hold on to is a hope that does not perish, spoil, or fade, then it means it is a hope that is present with us in the midst of what we are living through now, these times that we are in. So what are the signs that are helping you hold on to hope in these days? Go ahead, put them into the community feed there. And finally, what's the work that you're being called to in these times? The work of God is continuing even in the midst of these times, and God is continuing to invite us to join in with that work. Then what is the call that we are to respond to? As we watch and wait and work, what is the work that we will join in with? In our own community here, maybe further beyond, the work of being a friend, of staying in contact, of keeping connected, the work of joining in with the work of this local church here, joining in with a community wherever you are in the world right now. What is the work that God is calling you to be a part of? You see, our call, beloved children of God, is a very simple one. Our call is to live in moments like these as those who are consumed by hope. As those who know that this season that we are in is not the final word in all things, as those who are always looking out for God at work all around us. We are called to live as those who are deeply committed to rolling up our sleeves and engaging in the faithful work of our Master. And so, friends, as we begin a very different looking Advent compared to what we are used to here in Memorial, an Advent in which the crisis of our times is being lived out all around us. And make no mistake, it is a crisis going on around us. We, the beloved people and children of God, we watch for God, we wait in hope, and we roll up our sleeves and we get on with the work of God in our world. And we do all of this in the persistent, niggling, never going away hope that the Holy One of God is coming. And that when He does, we will celebrate His arrival and we will share in the victory and in the goodness of God, which is from everlasting to everlasting. My friends, it is good news for you and for me and for the world today. And if we've been distracted by all that's going on around us, then it's time to tune back in, to watch for God, to wait in hope, and to join in with God's work. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. I invite you where you are just now to just enter into a time of concentration and of response to the words that we have said here. We're going to play a video of some music that'll just be appropriate for us to respond to. Maybe you want to close your eyes where you're at and reflect on those three questions that I was asking. Where are we seeing God at work? What's giving us cause to hang on to hope? And what is God calling us to join in on in these days? Let's respond by listening to this music now.